evening's talk. I'm delighted to introduce Becky Gordon. Hi, Becky.
Hi.
So Becky is Regional Sustainability Manager for the UK, Ireland and the Middle East for Interface. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Interface, they are a global leader in the manufacture of commercial flooring with a 25-year track record in sustainability. And Becky has worked for them for over 12 years in a variety of commercial roles, helping architects and designers identify strategies and solutions. So Becky will speak for around 40 minutes. And then, as mentioned, if you could put any questions in the chat, and I will post these to Becky at the end, or I'll put these to Becky. We're aiming for a 7:30 p.m. finish. And if you could put any technical issues separately in the chat, so questions in the Q&A and any other queries in the chat, and then we can answer those most effectively. So over to Becky. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks so much for having me this evening. Hopefully everybody can see my screen okay. Please shout if there are any issues. So yeah, let's get started. As Clarence just said, Interface is a world-leading manufacturer of beautiful carbon neutral flooring. We operate in a broad range of sectors, including commercial, education, and healthcare environments. We actually offer 3 different flooring solutions. So we have carpet tile, LVT, which is luxury vinyl tile, and Nora rubber flooring. As previously mentioned, I've been at Interface for over 12 years now. I've had a little bit of a wiggly path, shall we say, in the company in terms of working within customer services, marketing, credit control, sales, and now I'm part of the global sustainability team. So I'm a little bit of an Interface dinosaur. And in terms of what I'm going to speak about this evening, I've mentioned that we've got 3 different flooring types, but the one that I'm going to focus on is carpet tile. It's our soft flooring finish, and so it's more related to textiles, and we've had the most development in it. So it's the product type that we've had since the 70s when we were founded. Our other products, the LVT and the Nora rubber flooring, are more recent additions to our portfolio. So when we're talking about sustainability, we've definitely made the most progress with our carpet tiles. So firstly, you might think, what on earth is a flooring manufacturer wanting to talk to you about sustainability for? Well, it's something that we've been doing for an incredibly long time, so over 27 years now. And this gentleman on screen here is our late founder, Ray Anderson. And he was your typical businessman. He wanted to make profit. He didn't really care about the environmental impact of his company. He took from the earth, he made a product, and then he wasted it at end of life. And he didn't really mind. It was typical businessman setup. But he was actually asked a question by a customer in the mid-90s, and it was, what's your company doing for the environment? Now, at that time, he had absolutely no answer for that question. But it did stop him in his tracks and make him think, and make him, more importantly, want to learn more about the environment and sustainability. And that led to the creation of our first mission back in 1994. And to do this, he got a team of external experts in biomimicry and sustainability, got them round a table and got them to advise on what direction we should be going in. And they set out our mission that we should have no negative impact on the planet by 2020. Now, this was the mid-90s, like nobody was talking about this kind of development at that point in time, particularly big business was not really addressing this. And since then, we've made really good progress. So this on screen here is our Ecometrics. The Ecometrics is essentially the measurement of our metabolism of our organization. So what we take in terms of raw materials and products, what we make, how we make it, and then what we waste. It's our sustainability data. And we put this together annually and release it for people to read. And as you can see, we've made really good progress. So since 1996, which is when we use as our baseline, we've reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 96%. We've reduced the carbon footprint of our carpet tiles by 76%. Out of all the materials we use across our entire portfolio, 48% of those come from either recycled or bio-based materials. We use 75% renewable energy across our manufacturing sites for carpet and rubber, and we send 86% less waste to landfill. Now, when we're looking at carpet tiles, as I said, we'll focus on for this evening. In terms of the raw materials that we're using, 88% of those now come from recycled or bio-based content. And in Europe, it's made with 100% renewable energy. So we've definitely made most progress with our carpet tiles. And all of this work hasn't gone unnoticed. So this is the results of a survey that an organisation called GlobeScan does on an annual basis. And it goes out to sustainability professionals and asks them who they think is leading with regards to sustainability. Now, Interface are the only company to have been in the top 10 since the list was founded in the late 90s. And even more sort of excitingly, we are the only B2B business on this list. Everyone else on this is more B2C and household names like Unilever. Everyone's heard of IKEA, Patagonia, the clothing brand. They're all well-known companies. So for a little old Interface to be on this list is really exciting. So Mission Zero was great, and it really kick-started our sustainability journey. But the challenges that the world faces are different today. So it's much more urgent. You'll turn on the news and weather and see reports on weather-related disasters around the world on what feels like a weekly basis. We've also got people like David Attenborough bringing the issue of marine plastics and carbon into people's homes on an evening where they sit and eat their tea in front of the telly. You've also got people like Greta Thunberg going out and inspiring entire generation of people to actually strike for climate, so really push for action on climate change. So all of this change in terms of the urgency and the feeling around sustainability was also mirrored internally with a push from our own employees to say, Mission Zero is great, but what's next? Like, it doesn't really seem to fit the issues that the world faces today. So that led us to look at what our next mission should be. And in 2016, we launched a new mission called Climate Take Back. Now, ultimately, Climate Take Back aims to help reverse global warming. Now, we're not daft. We know we can't do this on our own. We're a flooring manufacturer. We need more than just Interface doing this in order to reverse global warming. But we want to show what's possible. And ultimately, we want to be a carbon negative enterprise by 2040. So another big, bold, audacious goal. In terms of what this looks like, we have a framework of 4 pillars that we look at. So the first is to live zero, to continue everything we're doing in terms of getting our products and our business to zero. The second is to lead the industrial re-revolution. And this is all about doing business differently. How can we collaborate with people you might not expect a flooring manufacturer to collaborate? How can we look at our supply chains? How can we create a ripple effect? The third pillar is to let nature cool. Now, I think we're all aware of the impact that climate change has and that it's caused by humanity. And nature has a lot of solutions for all of the problems that we've created. But the problem is we keep getting in the way. So Let Nature Cool is all about how we can support nature to do what it does best to regulate the climate. And the fourth pillar is Love Carbon. And this is where we've been focusing a lot of our time over the last few years. And it's about stopping seeing carbon as the enemy and starting to see it as a resource or almost a building block for our products. And within our Climate Take Back mission, we've actually set a science-based target, which I'm not sure how many of you are aware of a science-based target, but it's an externally verified target that confirms that your business is in line with the Paris Agreement. So it relies on you committing to a target of reduction in carbon emissions, and you're not allowed to use offsets for that process. So it has to be an absolute reduction. So we launched that earlier this year, and it was a big step for us because it means that we've now got some shorter term goals because our target is by 2030. So a big focus for us is obviously reducing our carbon footprint. But it's not just Interface talking about this. This is a huge, huge talking point globally. And the reason is that carbon is one of the main drivers of climate change. The carbon that we release into the atmosphere is trapping too much heat, which is warming the planet. The impact of climate change is broad-based and systemic. It impacts biodiversity, weather patterns, rising sea levels, even financial markets and conflict. And that's just to name a few. Now on screen here is a project called Show Your Stripes, which was created by scientist Professor Ed Hawkins at the University of Reading, who wanted to find a way to communicate about climate change without loads of complex graphs and stats. And these are the UK stripes for the years 1884 to 2020. Now each line is a temperature record of a year. Blues are cooler years, reds are warmer years. The darker the blue, the cooler the temperature. The darker the red, the warmer the temperature. And as you can see, it shows an increase in temperature, especially over the last 20 years. The Show Your Stripes campaign has appeared at music festivals, been discussed on the news, weather, and even at UN summits. And you might have seen these stripes because during COP26, the BBC used this as a lot of their background to their news reports at COP. We're also seeing it sort of knitted into scarves or printed on face masks. So if you weren't aware of the stripes before, you'll now start seeing them popping up everywhere. So apologies if they become a really annoying thing to see everywhere. So the impact of climate change is clear, but what's the world actually doing to address these issues? Well, the United Nations brings countries together annually. And in 2015, at one of these conferences, COP21, which was held in Paris, a landmark agreement was reached to combat climate change and to accelerate and intensify the actions and investments needed for a sustainable, low-carbon future. Now, to achieve this, countries agreed to keep a global temperature rise this century well below 2 degrees Celsius, and to pursue efforts to limit this even further to 1.5 degrees. There's a global stocktake every 5 years to assess the collective progress. The first of these was COP26, which was held in Glasgow just a month or so ago now. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, are our leading scientists on the matter, and they've been invited to report on the world's progress. Their 2018 report states that we have until 2030 to change our ways and avoid going beyond a point of no return. And you might have seen their more recent report earlier this year, which was described as a code red for humanity. So all of this is a serious situation, but to take a positive from all of this, it's a call to action, and there is still time to act. So governments are responding through COP26 and the future COP conferences that will take place. And it'll be interesting to see over the next few months quite what comes out of that in terms of deliverable actions from governments. But what about businesses? Well, the thing about a broken carbon cycle is that it doesn't serve anybody well long term. And this is a quote from our founder, Ray Anderson. And he said, "What's the business case for ending life on Earth?" And we're starting to see across a range of industries, a lot of big businesses putting reducing their carbon footprint at the heart of their sustainability strategy. For example, Microsoft have created some really bold goals and targets around carbon. They're going to be carbon negative by 2030, and going even further have stated that by 2050, they're going to try and remove from the environment all of the carbon the company has emitted historically. Signify are a lighting brand, and they've been carbon neutral in their operations since 2020. And they're also looking at new business models. So looking at leasing models rather than sort of your traditional business model of selling the product when it's been manufactured. Sky have got a campaign called Go Zero, and this aims to be net zero by 2030. And another big business having targets around carbon is Apple. And Apple is already carbon neutral for its operations, but in July last year, it stated it was committing to being 100% carbon neutral for its supply chain and product lifecycle by 2030. So there's lots of big businesses out there setting goals and trying to really address carbon. But for us, it's also really important to look at what's happening at a more industry-based level. And for us, this means looking at what's happening within the built environment and construction industry. And the architect and design community has already started to act on the climate emergency. So following the announcement of the Sterling Prize in 2019, 17 previous winners came together to create Architects Declare. And this group has 11 points of action, including going beyond net zero carbon and a focus on lowering embodied carbon. There are also other groups such as Architects Climate Action Network, which are more of an activist-based group pushing for political change. So within our industry, there's a lot happening in terms of action on carbon and groups from much, much smaller companies getting together to really push for change. So that gives a little bit of context around the global issues and how businesses are approaching it, and from a relevant interface kind of local level, what's going on. But to do all of this, we kind of need to understand where we fit on carbon. So what's our impact? So here on screen is our carbon footprint as a business. Now, there's a lot of information on there. You don't need to read all of it, but just to talk you through the main bits. This here is our total carbon footprint. So this includes what's referred to as scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Now, if you're not familiar with those terms, it's quite simple in that your scope 1 and 2 are usually your direct emissions or the energy that you buy from other companies. Oh, I've lost my mouse, there we go. And that's this figure here. So for interface, our scope 1 and 2 emissions is a tiny percentage of our overall carbon footprint. The biggest part of our impact is in our scope 3 emissions. Now, our scope 3 emissions come from a range of different sources, but predominantly they're from our purchased goods and services. So it's our purchased raw materials that make up the bulk of our carbon footprint as a business. And this is a really important thing to do, this exercise, because it allows us to think where we need to focus as a business and how we can approach sustainability in a more logical sense than just kind of running around like headless chickens trying to make everything more sustainable. This gives us a real framework that we can work towards. And in 2018, we put a really big step to address this carbon footprint, and we made all of our products carbon neutral across the full life cycle. And this has taken time. So first of all, we've tried to reduce our footprint as much as possible. And then for the remaining footprint that we currently can't remove, we purchase carbon offsets. So we support projects that are third-party verified and gold standard or gold standard equivalent. We almost wanted to set a new standard for the flooring industry. Because if you can make a floor that's carbon neutral, then why wouldn't you? And all of this work on carbon hasn't gone unnoticed. In October last year, Interface were awarded a United Nations Global Climate Action Award for our work on carbon. So we were really excited about this because it's not every day that you win an award from the UN. So a very, very proud day for Interface. And just to touch on the fact that it's not just Interface doing this in terms of carbon neutral products, there are lots of examples out there. Allbirds trainers have calculated that each pair of shoes has a carbon footprint of 7.6 kilograms of CO2, which they offset to make carbon neutral footwear. And another example is Microsoft, who've committed to make 825,000 Xbox consoles carbon neutral. So I think carbon neutral products are becoming much more of a thing to see in consumer goods that you would go to the shop and buy. So as we said earlier, it's really clear now that we need to think more about, rather than doing less bad, so what our mission zero was, we need to start looking beyond that and actually doing good. So the climate emergency requires more than just doing less bad. So while our carbon neutral floors programme lets us take responsibility for what we do now, it's important that we continue to really address the problem of our carbon footprint in our products. And to do this, we need to dig down into the data behind our products and work out where we can actually have a real impact. So this is a typical life cycle for a product. It's got the raw materials, manufacturing, transport, installation, use and maintenance, and the end of life. When we look at our carpet tiles and their carbon footprint, this is how that data breaks down. So as you can see, a lot of people will say, oh, well, you've got a manufacturing site in Holland. That can't be sustainable to bring it across from Holland. Well, the transport and installation is only 3% of that overall carbon footprint. So it's maybe not as big an element as people may think. It's still something we need to address. It's still something we need to look at. But it's not where our time and resources should really be spent. Same with manufacturing. The shift to renewable energy has helped a lot with this stat. But manufacturing is now only 4% of our overall carbon footprint. So again, an area where you might think we need to do more, actually isn't the biggest problem. Our biggest problem is on our raw materials. So it's what we actually make our products from. So for a carpet tile, it might be the bitumen in the backing or for the nylon in the yarn. There's lots of other materials in there, but they're the two sort of biggest elements of a product. So we know that we need to reduce our impact for our products. So one of the first things we can do, and we've done historically, is to look at the design of the product and try and reduce the amount of waste. And that's where random design comes in. So you might think of carpet tiles as really plain squares like you used to get in the 80s, where they didn't really fit together, they weren't very attractive, or maybe ones with like really bold, heavy stripes. But the trends have moved away from those designs now. And one pivotal moment for us in terms of design, but also sustainability, was the introduction of random patterns. So if you imagine a forest floor covered in leaves, and then you take those leaves and you throw them in the air, each leaf will land in a completely different place to where it was before, but the overall look will be the same. And we want to take that approach in terms of that really random pattern and try and put that into our flooring products. This image is from our transformation range, which was the second random design product that we launched back in the late 90s. And a really, really popular product. We still have it today, and really kickstarted the random design for us. This is our icebreaker range and shows just how much the design of carpet tiles has progressed since then. So it's still random in the design, but it's much more organic. There's a few things that random design really help us with, and one is that they have much lower levels of installation waste. So installation waste on a random design product is about 1 to 2% in comparison to 3 to 5% on a more standard design products. There's also no dye lock concerns, which means that batches can be easily mixed. And all of this means that it's really easy to replace 1 or 2 tiles without them sticking out like a patchwork quilt, which is, I think, what a lot of people think of sort of more old-fashioned carpet tiles. And obviously, if you've got less installation waste, it's more sustainable. And if you can replace 1 or 2 tiles and it still look good, it means that the overall floor is going to be down for longer. And again, increasing the life of the product and making it more sustainable. Our move to introduce more biophilic inspired products, taking inspiration from nature, also means that the products can look better for longer. So they can hide more marks and wear. And this is really important, as the longer that our products are down, the more sustainable they are. We have a 15-year warranty on our products. They last for an awfully long time, but quite often they're taken up before that because they might not be cleaned properly or they might not be looked after. And this, in terms of designing the space and designing the product to have a more biophilic feel, so a more organic look, means that it just disguises these elements a little bit better. So good product design in terms of aesthetics, but also good interior design by our clients, means that more patterned products can be used in high traffic areas, and this can really make a difference to the carbon footprint of the spaces around us. So as well as looking at the aesthetic design of the product, we can also look to use less material. We know that the biggest issue is the raw material of our products. So by using less material, we can actually reduce the carbon footprint. This image shows one of our LVT hard flooring products alongside one of our micro-tuft carpet tiles. As you can see, the carpet tile is a lot less fluffy than what you would imagine for a typical carpet tile. And in fact, it uses up to about 50% less yarn than a standard carpet tile. And our clients can still create impactful spaces with these products. They're really popular in mainland Europe, particularly in Scandinavia, where a more minimal aesthetic is popular. And we've even managed to launch microtuff products that give the impression of having more texture than they actually do. This is one of my favorites. This is a range called Touch of Timber, and it almost mimics a wood grain in the floor, but it's still a carpet, so it still has all the benefits of acoustics and softness underfoot, etc., that you would expect from a carpet tile. The final area of sustainable product innovation I want to talk about is looking at the raw materials themselves. So as we've discussed, this is the area that has the biggest impact on our carbon footprint. And as we can use less in a microtuff product, a microtuff product isn't suitable for every project. So we need to make sure that we've got a range of products that are as sustainable as possible. And as you would expect, we've been doing a lot to address this. So firstly, when we're designing a product, we use 3 lenses to make a decision on the material that we use. So we look at the embodied carbon of a product. So obviously carbon is a big thing we're wanting to reduce. But we also look at the green chemistry. So we look at what goes into that product and making sure that there's no nasty chemicals in there. Because I'm sure you can imagine over the years in all flooring types, there's been some really nasty materials used. And finally, circular economy. So we want to make sure that we are putting in as much recycled and bio-based content as possible, but also that that product is suitable as much as possible for recycling at end of life. So really thinking about the circular aspects as well as the carbon and the green chemistry. Now, in terms of the materials that we're wanting to use, the big problem with carpet tiles is that historically it's been made from virgin petrochemicals. So it's made from a nylon yarn, or all of ours are a nylon yarn, and it's historically been virgin petrochemical nylon yarn, which is not great for the environment necessarily. So what we want to do is turn off that tap to virgin oil. And there are 2 ways we can do this. We can either look at bio-based raw materials, or we can look at recycled raw materials. And don't worry if you can't see the words on this slide. I appreciate the ones in the diagram are incredibly small. But what this diagram shows is just our progress on these 2 different material types over the years. So the green top one shows our progress on bio-based raw materials. And the bottom one is our recycled raw materials. So sorry if you've just heard my dog squeak then in the background. I think she's having a nice sleep. So in terms of the progress with our recycled and bio-based content, this graph shows you the percentages over the years from 2008 to this year. So in 2008, we only had 24% recycled and bio-based content in our product, and the majority of this was recycled content. Over the years, this has improved. We've looked at different yarn suppliers. We've looked at encouraging our yarn suppliers to move to more recycled content in their product. And this year and last year, we've looked a lot more into the bio-based materials, but we'll come on to that in a little bit. One of the things I wanted to touch on in terms of recycled materials is looking beyond your normal supply chain. So we challenged all of our yarn manufacturers in the 90s when Ray Anderson came up with our mission to move to be a more sustainable company. We challenged them to move with us, to look at the sustainability of their own companies and their own products. And one of those companies that really took us up on that was Aquafil. And we wanted to create with them a new supply chain for product. So the yarn that makes up carpet tile is the same yarn used in a lot of fishing nets. And commercial fisheries were already providing nets to Aquafil to turn into yarn for carpet tiles. But what we wanted to create was something that had more of a social impact, had a bit more of an environmental and social impact than just using commercial fishing nets. And fishing nets are a huge issue. I don't know if you have heard of the term ghost fishing before, but quite often nets are abandoned either on beaches or in the sea, and then they get stuck on coral reefs. They damage the reef, they kill a lot of fish, but nobody eats those fish. It's just completely disruptive. So we teamed up with Aquafil and with ZSL, so London Zoo, in order to come up with a program initially started in the Philippines to collect those nets. So local villagers collect up the nets, clean them, bale them, and sell them into our supply chain, into Aquafil. And it's a program that I'm incredibly excited about. It's one of the things that I think Interface have done that's some of the most bold stuff in terms of really pushing the boundaries on what you'd expect from a flooring manufacturer. You might not expect a flooring manufacturer to be teaming up with ZSL. And it was a really, really good program. And in terms of the reach and impact to date, I won't go through all these slides, all these numbers, because you can read them for yourselves. But as well as doing the fishing net collection, community banks were set up so that people could take out small loans to set up businesses. They've looked at protecting mangrove forests. They've looked at seaweed farming. There's been a lot of other investments in these communities because of the Networks programme, and a lot of people have benefited from it. But what's really important for us is this wasn't Interface's thing just to keep for ourselves. We wanted it to go beyond us. So over the years, we've it's kind of stood on its own 2 feet a little bit more. And most recently, they've sort of moved away from us a little bit, which is great. And the yarn that is now got this recycled content in from these nets can be used by any of our competitors. But it can also be used by other brands. So brands like Adidas and Prada are using this yarn that has come from this program, which is fantastic and just shows the ripple effects that you can have if you're really innovative with your supply chain and what you're looking at. Moving on to kind of looking at more recycled, but also including those bio-based materials. One issue that we really had to move away from was our backing. So we have had a bitumen-based Graflex backing since we started doing carpet tiles. It's been our backing on all of our products for an awfully long time. There's 2 issues with the bitumen backing. The first is that it has a really high carbon impact. And the second is that it's really difficult to recycle at any sort of scale. So you can do one-off cool projects where you might be able to separate stuff, but nothing at a scale that really works commercially. So at that point, it's more a nice marketing story than it is an actual scalable solution. So we wanted to look at different alternatives for what our backing could be. And late last year, we launched a new backing called Sequest Bio, and it's a carbon negative backing. It contains bio-based and recycled fillers, and that reduces the carbon footprint of the overall product by around 1/3. It's also designed for recycling. So it means that at the end of life of the product, we can take it back and try and reuse it. But if we can't reuse the product, we can recycle it. So really, really important if you're thinking about those 3 different lenses that we use for materials and deciding what goes in. But more importantly than just this backing being created, when we first launched it, it was on these products on screen, so a lot of our global collections. But this year, we've taken the move to put it on all of our carpet tiles as standard. So across our entire carpet portfolio, we've now put this more sustainable backing onto all of the products, which means that from a design or budget point of view, an interior designer has complete freedom over what product they want to use from Interface, and it will now have a 1/3 lower carbon footprint than it did before, and it will have on average 88% recycled or bio-based content. So really, really, really big impact at scale by putting on all of our products. So all that's great. It's all really important. Reducing the carbon footprint is really, really important. But we wanted to see if we could go further than just having low carbon products. Because the issues that the world faces need more than just low carbon. Low carbon products are great, but the issues we face are so much bigger than that. So to explain by analogy, imagine all the carbon in the atmosphere as an overflowing bathtub. The obvious first intervention is clear. We can turn off the tap. So we can turn off adding any excess greenhouse gases by bringing those emissions to 0. But this is not the only option. In addition to turning off the tap and curbing the source of those emissions, we can also look to drain the excess carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere like you would drain a bath. And that's where nature can play a vital role, absorbing and storing carbon through biological and chemical processes, effectively draining some of that excess out of the atmosphere. And this graph just puts that analogy into a graph essentially, and it's based on the work of the Stockholm Resilience Centre. The graph is designed to plot our path to 2050. And if we look back to that bathtub, the dark green radical decarbonisation is that turning off the taps. So it means using more renewable energy or becoming more efficient. But the graph highlights that this alone isn't enough to achieve a lot of those big global government goals and corporate goals that we talked about earlier in the presentation. But instead, we need to be looking at how we can support natural and human carbon sinks and stores. These options in the lighter green are all about how we can tackle the climate crisis by bringing carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it in natural or man-made carbon sinks and stores. And at Interface, we've been exploring whether elements of our products could store carbon and be a man-made carbon store, which is where the bio-based materials that I mentioned in the sequence bio backing on the previous slides come in. But we wanted to use this same technology to go even further than low carbon. Could we create a carbon negative carpet tile? Oh yes, we could, is the answer. And we're extremely excited to announce the launch of our Embodied Beauty collection, which contains our first carbon negative carpet tiles. They were launched earlier this year, and it is so exciting that we can now have a product that for the manufacturing, the raw materials of that product is carbon negative. So we're storing carbon within that product. And in terms of our progress on carbon, this is what that looks like. So back in the 90s, I appreciate these numbers probably mean very little, but in the 90s, our carbon footprint of a square metre of carpet was nearly 20 kilograms of CO2. Through switching to more recycled materials, using more renewable energy, we got that down to about 6.25 for a similar kind of style product. By moving to the Sequest bio backing, we got that down to around 3.95. So a reduction of around a third across the entire portfolio. But the last bar is what we achieve with a carbon negative product. So it's a negative carbon footprint. So a really, really, really big achievement, and just shows that how far we've come from those really petrochemical intensive products of the 90s. And Interface aren't the only ones doing carbon negative when it comes to products. And this first image is a pair of sunglasses, which is developed by a company called Made of Air, which is create a carbon negative material. And these sunglasses are actually in partnership with H&M. The next is some mycelium bricks and panels. So insulation panels that are made from fungi, essentially. So a really new innovation in building materials, and one that's not widespread at the moment, but is getting a lot of traction. The third one is carbon negative vodka. So if vodka is your tipple, you can now buy carbon negative vodka. So it's going across in loads of different industries in terms of consumer goods, building materials, carpet tiles. It's growing and growing as a field. So really, really exciting. And finally, I wanted to touch on end of life of our products, because we could do all this really cool stuff in terms of what raw materials we're putting into our products, how we're designing our products, trying to manufacture them in the most sustainable way with renewable energy. But if at the end of life, they just got thrown into landfill, it's not really doing our job in terms of trying to create a sustainable product. So this infographic looks a little bit complex, but essentially it's talking through what can happen with our newer products on the Sequest bio backing, which is now all of our products, in terms of them being designed for reuse and recycling. So in terms of reuse, we work with partners across the UK to try and reuse those products. One example is a company called Greenstream in South Wales, who employ long-term unemployed and ex-offenders to help get them back into the workplace. They take back the tiles from us and sort them to make sure they're in good enough condition. And they then sell them at low cost into housing associations and charities usually. So benefiting people that might not be able to have a good quality floor can have carpet tiles that might have come from your local bank in there as the bank is replacing the product. And this is really important because I said earlier, our products have a 15-year warranty. They're designed to last for an awful long time. But I am sure a lot of you have worked in offices that have had refurbishments before the products are really tired and old. It might be that someone has decided that the marketing team is no longer going to sit over there. They're going to sit over there, and they want to sit on a green carpet rather than a blue carpet. Stuff changes all the time. There's lots of reasons why those products change. But this ensures that those products get used for as long as possible before they have to go into any kind of recycling, repurposing, waste to energy, or landfill. So this programme focuses on reuse because it has the most social benefit and it has the lowest carbon footprint. But where the product isn't suitable for reuse, it can now be fully recycled. So it's been designed to be recycled. So we're really proud of our range programme. There's lots of work still to be done, and we've got even more work to do when we think about our hard flooring surfaces with the LVT and the rubber. But that's part of my job over the next few years, is looking at those elements. So that is a whistle-stop tour of Interface and how we're approaching sustainability and carbon. As I said at the start, it's something that we've been doing for an awfully long time, and there's still a lot of work to be done. So we've learnt lots and lots on the way, but we're continuing to learn every single day. And again, I don't know if you can see everything on this timeline, but this just shows our journey from 1994, when we first started our sustainability mission, some of the innovations that we've had along the way, just to show you it isn't something that happens overnight, but we're really, really proud of what we've done so far. And at Interface, we really do feel that it's important that companies, including manufacturers like ourselves, take responsibility for their impact. And more importantly, that we're part of the conversation. And obviously, I can answer your questions in a couple of minutes, but if you want to find out more about what I've talked about today, we do have a Designing with Carbon in Mind brochure, which might be a little bit too built environment specific for a lot of people on the call, but it gives an overview of carbon and the issues that we're facing. More interesting might be our Climate Take Back brochure, which sums up our sustainability mission, and there's our sustainability highlights document, which covers those ecometrics that I discussed at the start. But my biggest recommendation is for our Designing with Climate in Mind podcast, because it's hosted by my colleague John Koo, and it has people from lots of different industries on the podcast. It's not just architects and designers. There are some architects and designers on there, but it also has climate scientists, more consumer brand designers and things like that. So it's really worth checking out. And it's called Designing with Climate in Mind, and you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Deezer, Spotify, or on our blog if you'd rather find it through our blog. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Becky. That was a fantastic talk. Just so much information, lots to take in. We will be putting that on our YouTube page towards the end of the month. So if anyone wants to take a look at that, look at some of the figures in more detail, then we will notify members when that goes on. Yeah, and congratulations on the United Nations Award.
Yeah, it's not every day that happens, and I don't think it'll be happening again for a long time. So,
well, I think that it just shows. I mean, Ray Anderson was a pioneer in terms of I think one of the first industry or people in industry to pioneer the circular economy, and so Interface, I imagine, is very much a convert already in terms of aiming for carbon reduction, being very proactive. How do you sort of inspire new people into the business to really take that on board? And obviously for people working in other companies where it hasn't been one of the foundations.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. So at Interface, we're definitely fortunate that it came top down initially, because inevitably there's a lot of time and resources that go into a lot of the innovations that we've done along the way. But I think one thing that was really important is that Ray didn't necessarily think he had all the answers. So it was very much a case of bringing in external experts initially to set that goal, but then going out to the employees and trying to inspire them to do change. So it's within a company, a large global company, your people at the top don't necessarily know how to work the machinery. I'm working sustainability. I don't know how to even turn one of our machines on, never mind make anything on it. So it's not for me to turn around and tell an engineer or someone working on that machine how it could be more sustainable. It's all about trying to inspire them and almost empower them to make changes within their scope of influence. So your area of expertise within the company, look at it and think about how you could change things, what you could do differently, because you're the expert in that job that you do on a day-to-day basis. And I think that one interesting thing he did with the manufacturing sites was we've got several manufacturing sites globally, and he almost put a competition out there in terms of which factory could make the most progress. So not only were they all pushing to make sustainable innovations, but those results were then shared and learnings were sort of passed on between the different factories. So you had everyone pushing towards the same goal, but a lot of information sharing to make sure that it can, that spreads and grows within the company. And I think that there's a lot of work that goes into new employees in terms of trying to explain the story to them. Like we said, Interface isn't necessarily a household brand. People don't necessarily come to Interface knowing the full story. Some will do higher up. Obviously, people tend to do a bit more research before they join, but not everyone does. So yeah, a lot of teaching new starters about what's going on and trying to get them empowered and interested in making change themselves.
Yes, I think it's a really good point. So rather than looking at sustainability as a bolt-on or an afterthought, that how can I make a contribution as an individual, and it's those small steps, isn't it? And
yeah, definitely. And I think that like one thing that's always been really key, because I've been at Interface a long time. I've worked in lots of different departments, and there was a point in time for me where I had a realization that whatever your job is at Interface, it doesn't matter if it's got sustainability in the title or not. Sustainability is still your job. So now it's 100% of my job, but before it was always part of my job to think about it, and to whether it's account managers or customer services talking to our customers about it and trying to spread that ripple effect, or whether it's people in our manufacturing sites actually making changes to machines. Everyone's almost got sustainability in their title, even if they don't.
Yes, we've got a couple of questions coming in. Hopefully people do put your questions to Becky. It's a rare opportunity to hear more about Interface's work. So we've got one here from Geraldine. Thank you for a fascinating talk. Is Interface going to supply the domestic market? And if not, is there a company working in this area?
So currently, no, not necessarily in terms of just your general everyday carpet for your house. We only do carpet tiles. We don't do broadloom carpet. So that tends to be the biggest thing that people want, broadloom carpet in their homes as opposed to carpet tiles. You would be able to get carpet tiles. It would just have to be bought through a distributor or a local flooring contractor. So you could still get the product. It's just we don't market to that particular sector, but it's mainly because the products that we have traditionally aren't necessarily used all that much. We're starting to see them used more in larger scale residential settings, so like flats, apartment blocks, that kind of thing, and in hospitality, so in hotels, but it's not really shifted to the residential market fully.
Do you see it as an opportunity for Interface? I mean, in terms of Interface's market share, presumably you are one of the biggest contract tile manufacturers.
Yeah, potentially. I do think the issue of not doing broadloom carpet is a big stumbling block, because people traditionally like a sheet carpet in their home as opposed to carpet tiles, and I think that is something that will last for quite a while. We do find quite a lot of our architects and designers that we work with end up having interface products in their homes because they know the benefits of it. But I think it would take a lot of resources in terms of marketing and sales to push into as a market, because it would have to be marketing to consumers rather than to businesses, which is a big shift for us. So never say never, but it's definitely not on the short-term plans necessarily.
We have a question here from Jonathan from the Cloth Workers Livery Company. Again, saying thank you very much for a very interesting talk. And could you expand on the human carbon sink idea? More examples of extracting carbon from the atmosphere and storing it, and also can carbon be destroyed?
So in terms of the carbon sink idea, there's a few different ways you can look at it. There are machines that can literally pull carbon out of the atmosphere, but there is a lot of debate at the moment as to how scalable that is a solution. It's a really cool innovation, but is it going to be a long-term solution for us? But the majority of products that are carbon negative, it's that bio-based element that's allowing them to be carbon negative. So if you imagine, as a plant grows, it takes carbon out of the atmosphere. That's just what plants do through photosynthesis. They remove carbon from the atmosphere and they store that carbon within themselves. So if you can then harvest that plant, whether you are harvesting the entire plant or whether you're extracting an oil or a resin from the plant, you're then taking that carbon that was stored in that plant and you can then store that in your products. Now, that makes it sound really simple, but obviously you'd need to make your products in a really sustainable way, because you don't want a really carbon intensive manufacturing process, because it'll undo all that good work of that carbon that you've stored in your product from using bio-based materials. A really easy example to look at is some wood-based products. So there is, traditionally on buildings, steel and concrete are used to build the shell. But there is a material called CLT, which is cross-laminated timber, and it's effectively a really strong timber frame for a building. Now, trees, as they grow, sequester a lot of carbon, and providing you can harvest that tree in a sustainable way, you can take that carbon that's been locked into that tree and use it as a building material. So that would then be a carbon negative material. And just one further point to touch on when we talk about products is that it all kind of potentially sounds a bit like people can just claim whatever they want to, but there are things called environmental product declarations, or EPDs, which are an externally verified document which give you lots of details about the sustainability of the product. And they don't necessarily say whether it's good or bad, they just give you that raw data. And part of that includes the carbon footprint. So whenever a company is talking about carbon negative product, the way of verifying that or checking that is through their environmental product declaration, or EPD. And it just gives you that raw data to make sure that they're not telling fibs.
Yes, you've actually preempted my next question, which was, there are mixed reports that you hear about companies claiming, in terms of, where they sit in terms of their carbon footprint and how you ensure that it is valid. So what you're saying is it's an impartial assessment.
Yeah, so there's two different things you can look at. There's the carbon footprint of the actual product itself, so that would be an environmental product declaration that you look at, but also where companies are claiming carbon neutrality, as we are with our carbon neutral floors program, or even if they're claiming whole company carbon neutrality, the likelihood is that at the moment they are using carbon offsets to do that. Now, the world of carbon offsetting is a little bit of a wild west. There is a lot of people out there offering carbon offset projects which aren't necessarily worth the paper that they're written on. But the key is getting a third-party verified program. So ours is verified by an organization called Apex, and they verify it to make sure that what we're doing is additional. So the carbon is actually being saved. It's not just stuff that was already going to happen anyway. And it makes sure they're credible. So there's different standards as well, and all of ours are gold standard or gold standard equivalent, which means that we're using the best type of offset program and it's all then verified by a third party. And I think that's the area that for most people is going to be the most confusing thing over the next few years, when companies are claiming this, that, and the other in terms of carbon. And I think that that third party verification is a really important aspect, but it won't necessarily be something you can find out if you're looking at consumer goods and stuff like that, because not all companies will disclose kind of the full details about their carbon neutral offsets.
Yeah, so is it really down to the individual company to go through that third party verification? There isn't a legislation or policy that at the moment says that companies claiming have to have a equal
No, so there's no regulation or standards. I think the best way to think about all of this talk on carbon is it's really new in terms of corporate goals, government goals, all that kind of thing. It's a really new area. So there's a lot of people with a lot of slightly different definitions. And if you look at the issue globally, it's even worse. Like, people around the world have completely different definitions of what net zero might mean or what carbon neutral might mean. I do think that's a thing that is going to become clearer as time goes on. So one thing that I mentioned early on in the talk was science-based targets. Now, Interface have got a science-based target on our carbon reduction, but Science-Based Targets a few weeks ago actually launched a new target that you could go for, which was a net zero science-based target. Now, that's the first step I've seen to a really, really credible carbon neutral kind of status. That's looking at a company rather than a product. But I think more and more standards will come. It's just so new in terms of, at the moment, companies can kind of shout whatever they want to shout, and there's not enough kind of understanding and guidance on what's the right or the wrong thing. But I do think that will change. I do think more and more guidance will come out, and companies that are not doing it properly will start to get called out on it. So it will make them do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, Becky. I think we're just about out of time. I think we've covered quite a number of points. But if anyone has any questions subsequently, there's just one, so maybe time just for one more. But I was going to say, do email us, and we can put those to Becky after. Janet, thank you for your message. Again, thanks for a very interesting talk. What do you see as the major drivers on carbon reduction for your customers? Are they, as in the fashion area, being directed by a knowledgeable end consumer?
So I think that there's a mixture of drivers. I think that end user clients, who are quite often like your big corporate organizations, they're setting really bold goals around carbon. They don't necessarily know how they're going to hit it, but they've got those goals. So they're pushing their supply chain, including the architects and designers, to think about carbon. But also the architect and design community really are pushing this themselves. There's some amazing examples of designers really pushing the boundaries in terms of what's possible and kind of what a practice should be achieving. So I think that there's a few different drivers. End user clients are definitely pushing it, but there's a big drive from within the industry themselves to actually get moving on this. And it's a really dirty industry, is the built environment. It's responsible for 39% of global carbon emissions. So really making a difference is important. And I think there's a lot of people in the industry that do recognize that. So it's growing. And over the next few years, it will almost become a non-negotiable, I think, for people to be looking at it.
Well, thank you very much, Becky, for your time. As a token of our thanks, just like to send you a little memento from Bradford Textile Society. And thank you for all our attendees joining this evening.